most of the class is down in the breakfast thing, and I guess we weren't invited to breakfast. No, I'm just teasing. But that's funny. He did, yeah. No, that's good. That's very good. But yes, so today we are going to work our way through a few of the most important passages that deal with the end times, and I feel like we're going to try to read them as just in context as we can, and we'll kind of talk about it a little bit before and a little bit after. But it will be a lot of reading today, just to warn you. But for me, I do feel like there's such a value in just being able to take our time on such a difficult subject. We try so many times to fit everything in like 45 minutes, and man, there's just so many things you just can't. And so I feel like it's there's such a value to being able to slow down and just break things down. And honestly, the way we've done it here is just so good. We're talking about terms before we ever get in there, and so that way, once we say them again, we'll have a little bit more understanding to them, I hope.
A lot of the terms I wasn't familiar with.
Sure, no, there are a lot of fancy, what I would consider 11th grade words, and so.
Everyday conversation.
No, you don't.
They don't come up.
But I will say, the more familiar we make ourselves with those type of words and thoughts and systems, I do think it helps us understand. One thing I'll say, I'll pick on Wayne. Wayne gave me this book before we got started, and it was on the end times. And he's like, now, I feel like this is a very neutral book, and it doesn't really pick a side. And I was like, I got finished with chapter 2, and I was like, this is the most skewed book I've ever read. I want you to know that, And but it's so sneaky how the way you can say one thing and you just have to understand. I picked on Peter last week because he said something very where he was breaking it down into sections and you didn't even realize it. And I'm like, there's a lot to be aware of when you're reading those things.
Have you ever read? It came out in the 70s. Late Great Plan.
No, but that's a very big book when it comes to the end times.
My stepmother gave it to me back, 30 years ago, and I started off reading it, and chapter after chapter went by, and this ties in with the history I know.
Mm-hmm.
And then somewhere about midway through the book, it started changing, and I went, wait a minute, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
So I want to, Peter's familiar with the book.
He is.
I'd like to get you guys' opinion on
Mm-hmm.
it too, and what do you think about it?
I will say that, I know a summary of it. I know it's 1972. It's one of the biggest books of that time, and I think what he was doing was making sense of the Bible in the modern world. So for that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, some of the things where he turns the the locusts into Tomahawk helicopters and all those kind of things. I mean, there's a little bit of So, but no, I've never read it all the way through, but I know that it does cover the whole dispensational view. That, and it's all about the rapture, and it's all and it follows through those views, which
Well, I was
that's
in the
cool.
library last September. Every year at the library they have book sales,
Mm-hmm.
and I found a hardback book of Late Great Planet Earth and one of his later books.
Okay.
In one volume.
Oh.
For like 50 cents.
That's a
So I
good
bought
deal.
it, and I said,
That's good.
I'm going to read it again.
Yep.
And knowing what I know now,
Mm-hmm.
give it another try and,
Yep.
and get through it.
No, that's
Because it was interesting. Like I said, this sounds good. And then it kind of, something, like you said, skewed or something changed. And,
no, it's very
I
interesting.
kind of lost it, but I need to read it now again. And
Mm-hmm.
see what I think.
No, that's very good. We'll start off in Isaiah 65. If you want to follow along, I'll read it out. I was going to put the words up on it, but there are so many words that it was just going to be more flicking and paying attention to that. So I just thought, well, there's a lot more than that. But I will. I'll do my best. One thing I'll say, when I took a lot of seminary classes online, and one of the most interesting things that happened to me as I took those classes, and I didn't start taking them until I was, 44 or something like that, so I was older. But I really didn't have an appreciation, or I couldn't really relate to somebody sitting down and reading long passages over an amount of time. We're very unfamiliar to it. Sometimes on a Sunday morning, if he were to read a whole chapter almost, we'd be like, man, he's going to read the whole thing? Like we have that much of a, now I think in our own time, we're okay with reading it, maybe reading a couple chapters in a row or a few. But when you're sitting in a and this was like students and the professor read I think it was 4 sessions, he read Ezekiel, which is about 12 hours of reading, I think. Ezekiel.
Yeah, that's pretty deep.
Whew, it is deep. And when you're sitting there listening to like 8 or 9 chapters straight, it is a very different. But one thing I think it does is it does get you used to slowing down and just taking it in, and there's a certain worth to that, Yeah, for me, an interesting thing I'll do sometimes is if I'm going to try to read a lot, I will get on YouTube and I'll pull up, let's just say, the ESV audio of Matthew 6, and I'll read it as he's reading it, and I feel like I'm kind of being read to a little bit, but like I like that too, trying to connect to it as much as I can, but I do feel like that slowing down and hearing it is an important thing, so hopefully that's what we'll do today. I have several passages that we've picked out here, and they're all dealing with the end times. They're the most important, the 6 most important passages is my goal. So we're going to start off, and we're going to kind of read these in order. We're going to start off in Isaiah, and Isaiah, he talks about this promise of the new heavens and the new earth. And that's going to relate when we get into Daniel, who gives us these big visions. He gives us the Ancient of Days. He gives us the Son of Man. There's this judgment that is there, and there's an everlasting kingdom. Then there's a couple passages where Jesus is talking in Matthew's gospel about, he's describing the end of the age, and he's talking about the coming of the Son of Man and the gathering, and he mentions the judgment also. And then there's a passage that we're going to talk about from 1 Thessalonians, which is one of the biggest for the rapture. But Paul talks about the resurrection of the believers and when Jesus comes back. And then the last one is in Revelation 20 and 21, where there's this new millennium that comes, or there's this final judgment, and there's this new creation. And when we listen to each one of them read together, I hope that we can either assess, is this the same situation? Are these separate individual things? And we'll just kind of listen. There's so many things that connect, but I feel like just trying to be as neutral as we can. Like, what does the text say? Like, what is being said here? What are we supposed to understand out of this? How do these systems that we've already talked about, how do they fit into this? So what's the order in which these things happen is a good question as we go into the next couple weeks as we're talking about those systems more. One thing that I do want to say is no matter which one of those systems you want to use, Jesus, God wins, I think is the most important thing. The dead will be raised, evil is going to be judged, God's people will be gathered to him, and God's kingdom ultimately prevails. So, we're going to be reading some of this. There's a lot to be said, especially when we get into, Isaiah. It's much more of a prophecy section where we're at. But a lot of these things use what I would consider language that can be taken either as literally or as, is this some type of a representation? Is this a symbol? Is this some kind of a, is there something else I'm supposed to understand out of this? One mistake I think that we can make is we can say, all of this must be literal. This all must be literal, And just as equally wrong for that is all of this must be symbols. Every single thing in here is symbols. The numbers are symbols. This is symbols. The door is a symbol. All these things are symbols. Whereas that's just as probably loose and wrong, So I do think we need to kind of evaluate as we read through. For an example, in Daniel 7, it's going to say that the books were opened. Here we are at this final judgment. The books are opened. Now, does that mean that these literal physical books are going to be opened? Or does that mean that all of the knowledge that's out there, that's right, all of it has been taken in, it's completely finished, and now we have this full knowledge, And so even that alone, I will say there's a lot of people who go to church, who read their Bible, who will tell you there's a literal book of life, And I don't want to say anything one way or the other. I just think it's something to understand. What do I think? Do I think there's this book that has my name written in it, or a scroll, or however you want to call that, that document? Is this an actual book? Will it be opened, or is there something else going on? The imagery, if you're going to call it imagery, it comes from this courtroom setting, and the point is that the evidence is complete and God's judgment is perfectly informed. I like that. There's another line in there that says the court sat, and if you were to use it literally, it would mean the judgment sitting. Here comes the judgment. But if you were to look at it in another way, it would look at like all of these things have been answered, and now we're going to find out the final verdict. And so instead of like this actual courtroom scene, we understand it to be this time of judgment. And so there's a lot to be said there. I don't want to get off the subject. Isaiah 65. We're going to read just 8 verses here, 17 through 25. We're at the end of Isaiah here. He spends a lot of time talking about judgment and Israel's sin and their exile, and now how they're going to be restored. And by here, he's already into this political restoration is where he's at. He says God's going to create this new heavens and this new earth, which is going to tie us exactly into Revelation 21. So a couple things I want to point out as we get into it. This new creation, it shows this blessing and this peace that we always associate with heaven, And it also contains language about death and childbirth and building houses and planting vineyards and this extraordinary long life. So, is he talking about this final state? What's Isaiah talking about here? Is he talking about this future earthly kingdom on earth? Those are different questions I think we need to ask. I'll go ahead and read through it, and then we'll talk about it just a little bit before we move into the next one. But Isaiah 65, verses 17 through 25. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create, for behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be a gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity. For they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord, and their descendants with them. Because before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together. The lion shall eat the straw like the ox, and dust shall be the serpent's food. They shall not destroy or hurt in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. So for me, I think one of the first things that stands out there is that he is going to create this place that doesn't sound like our place. I think that's pretty fair. This new heaven, this new earth, that just sounds like this completely different place. And when he describes it, it doesn't even click with me as far as like my everyday life now. I think that's a good thing. It is the Bible moving towards this creation where everything's right. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Everything's by his design, and there's this joy instead of weeping. There's this security instead of being taken advantage of. people enjoy the fruit of their own labor. He kind of lays that out there, and he spends a couple verses even talking about that, which is pretty unique. There's this peace even between the animals. The wolf and the lamb, they feed together, and everything's kind of reconciled. And I think, if there's one thing that I would underline there, it's that death shall be no more. That is a big part of it. So there's a lot of different interpretations of this. We're not going to really go into many of them, but I do want you to hold on to that Isaiah here. Isaiah, he talks about this new heavens, this new earth, and then when we get to Revelation 21, it just works right into it, But I do think it becomes important when we start discussing the millennium itself, If you were saying that the millennium hasn't happened yet, if you were interpreting it like that, then you're talking about these things that are going to happen later. It's going to happen, during Christ's kingdom later. But someone who says that this could be happening now, it's hard to connect with that, because like all these things don't happen now, Or if you were to say we're already past the millennium, they would talk about, people who. I'll just read it. It's good. A postmillennial interpreter may emphasize the extraordinary expansion of kingdom blessing within history, although many interpretations of that vary. And I don't want us to sit down and question that one yet. I just want us to kind of set that one, kind of have our thoughts on it, and we'll keep moving on. But just hold on to that. I saw a new heaven and a new earth. That's a good one. Our next passage is in Daniel 7. Now, Daniel 7 is a very interesting place in the Bible. Daniel itself is very interesting. Chapters 1 through 6 kind of have this narrative story. It's kind of like these court reports of all these events that happen, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the lion's den and all of these different events. And then when chapter 7 starts, everything's different. It goes from being written in Hebrew to Aramaic. It has these visions and these grand apocalyptic literature is the term for it, where you talk about, in this vision I saw, and you have these things that could be interpreted as representing other things. And we'll talk more about that. But the first thing that he sees is he sees 4 beasts coming from the sea. And when we hear that, we say, okay, now are these literal beasts? Are these earthly kingdoms? I think those are the two ways of weighing these things. And then you have these beasts and this chaos, and then Daniel sees this throne, and sitting on it is the Ancient of Days, and that is a big term. And so there's this courtroom going on, and the Ancient of Days, he's sitting on his throne, and for most interpreters that would mean the Father. That's who the Ancient of Days is. And Daniel sees this one that looks like the Son of Man coming on the clouds to the Ancient of Days, and that would represent Jesus, And so as we read through this, we're going to it's gonna weigh in with our other scenes as well. So we're in Daniel 7, 9 through 14, and then I'm going to read 21 through 27 because these are the most relevant verses. So as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. The stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked then, because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like the Son of Man, like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that should not be destroyed. And then verses 21 through 27 say, "As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, As for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and trample it down, and break it into pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall rise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be made different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half time. And the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and the dominions shall serve and obey him." So, Daniel gives this very long section here where he's talking about these beasts. He lays it out like I feel like he gives this human quality to the Ancient of Days. He is in this scene with all of these other characters. Now, if you wanted to say he doesn't make the beasts seem human at first, that's okay. I can see that to you. So there is some supernaturalness to the way he's laying it out. But he does say that these beasts, they come out of this chaos, out of this chaotic sea. And here comes the Son of Man. He's on the clouds of heaven. And there's all of these grand things that are going on, you know. Now, if you wanted to interpret this as if it's symbols, that's just fine. So you have these earthly nations, you have 4, and they're all represented in this way that they operate outside of God, like they're a beast. They're not following this natural order. And then you have, the Ancient of Days, and he's correcting. He has this dominion. He has this glory and this everlasting kingdom, similar to what Daniel laid out when we went through that passage. There is this long period of, time that's going to happen. And for a while, it looks like the beasts are winning. And then the court sits, and there's this judgment where the kingdom's given to the saints. And I think there is this thing that Daniel, he says here, where there's this persecution that happens before the victory. And I think we'll see that as we move into Revelation. But like there's this overthrow of these beasts or these earthly kingdoms. And so we can see that being delivered here. And then there's this everlasting dominion, this kingdom that will be given to the saints. He doesn't give us every detail. Some people would tell you that he doesn't even give it to you in chronological order, which can make far more complicated. Reading Daniel is a very complicated book, but what we can see is one of his points here that we can take away from this is the beasts lose and the king wins. I think that's pretty easy to see. That's what he's telling us will happen. One of the most important things we can see is that he applies these things to himself. He says there's 2 expressions. There's the Son of Man and there's the clouds of heaven. I think those are 2 things that he has here, or that he applies to Jesus, I said to himself, that he applies to Jesus in this text, which we're going to carry with us. The Son of Man, the clouds of heaven. We'll pick that, we'll hold on to that. We'll move into our next verse here, our next chapter, which is Matthew 17. So we go from this apocalyptic vision that Daniel's talking about. I saw this and I saw this, all these strange things. Whereas in Matthew 13, Jesus starts talking in parables. And they've asked, if God's kingdom's already here, then why is evil still here? And he's answering this in this parable. And why didn't God immediately remove all this wickedness? He answers through the parable of the wheat and the weeds. And he starts talking about the farmer planting good seed, and we're very familiar with this thing. And the master says, wait until the harvest, then there will be this separation. And so in Matthew 13, verses 24 through 43, this is a longer section. So again, you'll have to just breathe deep, and just we'll try to eat this up here. I'm just gonna read through it, starting in verse 23. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. And then verse 24. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, no, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. He put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. All these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him, saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. And he answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the evil who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. So, there's a lot, and man, it really ends strong there as well. But Jesus says there's this sower, and as he has this more intimate scene where he's personal with his disciples, and they ask, he gives them the symbolism that he uses before the crowd. He says that the sower is the Son of Man, and that the field's the world. The good seed is the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. The enemy is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So I do feel like the most important line there is the end of the age, and that is what ties it to the end of the age. You know, one thing I'll say about the end of the age, I do look at it like we only look at it like the end of things. But it's much more similar to where if you go to a graduation, like a high school graduation, they call it a commencement, because it's the beginning. It is the end of this phase or this, but this part is complete. And now we're going to go into this part which we're just beginning. And that's a much better way of looking at the end of the age, rather than it's the end of everything we know and everything we're happy with and our life as we know it, I think is a good way we kind of look at it in our modern terms. Into looking at it like it's the end of this, but it is the beginning of everything that the earthly kingdom is promising. All of these things are so much better at the end of the age. This is an important part when we talk about the end times, because this is Jesus's way in. He talks about the God's kingdom. Should we be expecting this increasing conflict that he's talking about here? Does the kingdom exist while this evil is still there? I think most of us would kind of say on the surface, it does kind of appear as if that there's a lot of people that will tell you there's a big separation in this. There's a lot of different systems that have debate over the order of the things that Jesus lays out here and the way he talks about it. The kingdom's presently at work, evil's presently present. God hasn't lost control just because there's evil. I think that's an important thing. But there is this final separation that Jesus talks about here, and then he takes his time to explain it to his disciples, where there's going to be this judgment. There's going to be this binding up and this separation. And I think that's one of the major lessons there. Quickly, I'm going to move into Matthew 24. Matthew 24 is at least the second most important passage when you talk about end times. It is in the Olivet Discourse. It's he's talking about so many things here. He predicts the destruction of the temple, which everybody would have just fallen over. He's talking to him about these things. He's talking about his coming and the end of the age. And so there's a lot of different interpretations of Matthew 24, just to be as plain as I can. How much of this refers to what's going to happen before the eyes of the people he's talking to? How many of this refers to the temple that's going to be torn down in 70 AD, 37 years from now, when he's talking? Or are all these things, this future fulfillment, all these things are going to happen much later, when Jesus' future return happens? So keep those two. Those are two very different views of this. But there's a lot of different interpretations here, and Wayne talked about what's already happening, what hasn't happened yet. This is one of the most major places for that. And again, as we read through Matthew 24, verses 3 through 31, listen for Daniel 7. Daniel 7 is here in this text on purpose, verse 3 says, "As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us when these things will be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?' And Jesus answered them, 'See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. And you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. For alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may be in winter or on a Sabbath, and then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, 'Look, here's the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, 'Look, he is in the wilderness,' do not go out. If they say, 'Look, he is in the inner rooms,' do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of heaven will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, and from one end of heaven to the other." And then I'll pick up here in chapter 25, verse 31. There's one little section here I'm going to include. When the Son of Man, this is verse 31, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. The king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' Then the righteous will answer him, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will answer them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me.' Then he will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me.' Then they also will answer, saying, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you?' Then he will answer to them, saying, 'Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me.' And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." Now, I feel like almost any discussion of that gives a preference to one view or another. I do want to talk about, there's so many things that he mentions there, as Jesus is laying out his version of the end times, or at least a glimpse of it. I think is a more fair. He's not saying these are the only things that will happen, or these are the specific ways that they will happen. He has some imagery there as well, but he talks about this time of tribulation. He talks about this these different nations there before him. Here's the Son of Man again. There's the clouds. There's the power, the glory, the angels. There's this gathering, and then there's the judgment, the separation, the judgment, whatever you want to refer to it there. And I do feel like Daniel's still in our ears as the one who looks like the Son of Man. He comes on the clouds of heaven, and Jesus says they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And this is not like some type of an accident where there's these similar lines, you know. Matthew knows exactly what he's saying in the way that he's writing it here. Jesus is identifying himself as a character in Daniel 7. I think that's completely not taking anything out there of the context. The clouds are important. You know, you have the clouds of the Old Testament always represent presence and the glory of God. And so Jesus is making this extraordinary claim about himself And then we talked about in Matthew 25 there where he's seated on his throne, he's judging the nations. And again, Daniel 7, we've got him on his throne. We've got this judgment to the nations. We have this tribulation. So many different things are happening here that are happening in each, or they're at least connected, I think is a fair way of saying that. In the center of Matthew 24 is this speculation about these antichrist type of false prophets, and then Jesus himself, being the Christ, being the true Messiah. So we kind of have all that going on. Two more passages. 1 Thessalonians 4 is one of my favorite passages. When I was young, my grandfather, who would have been a premillennial dispensationalist, he would have told you that 1 Thessalonians is talking about the future rapture of the church, and he would probably say what I'm saying is pretty close to heresy. But I'm just saying there are many different ways of understanding 1 Thessalonians in different systems. You don't have to just have one. But what we're going to try to do is I'm going to try to talk about what Paul's saying here. He is giving this pastoral advice in 1 Thessalonians. In any of his epistles, he's giving this advice to the church. Hey, you guys are doing this, this, and this. You should be doing that, that, and that. That's the way, to understand it. If you're just pulling out 1 Thessalonians out of nowhere, that's where we're at. There's this level of correction to it. There's this level of, hey, you guys are doing this right. But at the same time, this is this letter. So it's not quite like Jesus' parable, or not quite like Daniel's vision, or even Isaiah's prophecy. It's a little bit of a different read. So just to kind of set up the different tone there. But he doesn't want them to grieve as the others who have no hope do. And so this is one of the foundations of Christian eschatology, Christian views of the end times of death and of the resurrection of Jesus. So 1 Thessalonians 4, I'll read 13 through 5:11. This is about a 5-minute read, so it's a pretty lengthy one. It's 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 5:11. Yeah. So it's a little lengthy, but here's Paul speaking to the church in Thessalonica. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with a voice of an archangel, and with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. Now concerning the times and the season, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying there is peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you who are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we might live with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you are doing. So here we have Paul, and he's speaking to the church, and he kind of lays out this order. He has this sequence. He has the Lord descending, there's this command, there's this voice from an archangel, there's this trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ rise. Then the living believers are caught up together with them, and they meet the Lord. And the result is we will always be with the Lord. I think in present, in what's already happening and what hasn't happened yet. And so Paul in chapter 5 goes to, he calls it the day of the Lord. And I feel like there's this important connection there for when we're looking at the end time views, where this is the central passage to the discussions of the rapture. This is the scene here. And if you're going to listen to a sermon on the rapture, they're going to talk about 1 Thessalonians in some way. The caught up here, rapizio, is the term that is used in our interpretation of that word. That's where we get our word rapture from. But the real disagreement is not whether believers will be caught up, because that is what says it's going to happen. It's Paul plainly says that. The disagreement happens when this occurs in a relationship to the tribulation and the other end time events. So that's an important thing to keep in your head. Hopefully we've got about 150 questions in our heads to we're going to unload them on Wayne and Peter next week. But I do think that's the thing, is like we know there's going to be this, the church will be taken up, but is that before judgments happen? Is that after judgment? Is all this, here he comes on the clouds and it all happens at once? There's several different interpretations by, I would say, preachers who you have heard preach before. I think that's a fair way of looking at it. We've heard preachers preach many different views of this without realizing it sometimes. I would say in the South, in Southern Baptist churches, particularly, we have heard a pre-millennial. So this happens before all of the end time events start. So that's the most common way we've heard that. But without realizing it sometimes, especially if you if you travel in churches or if you watch YouTube videos or different things, you're going to hear some other views, and it's very easy to just hear just a couple different words and, oh, hold on, we're over here and now we're saying the rapture happens as this happens. So just to confuse you a little bit more. But he closes out to say, let me encourage one another with these words. Let me encourage and build up one another. That's what he's doing here. One of my favorite things about the New Testament is it is written in a way of expectation of Jesus' second coming. I think that's a good way that Paul writes. Paul writes, for me, he's awake every night. He's looking out the window. You know what I mean? Like he is in this constant state of waiting, expectation. And I think that's the way he writes it for us to be as well. Let's not be drunk at night. Let's not be unaware of what's going on. Let's be sober and fully aware and ready for these things. So our last passage is the most confusing of all. It is Revelation 20. It is the end times most debated passage. I think this is probably the central passage. Matthew 24 and this are the two. But it is what I'm going to consider apocalyptic literature. There's symbols being used. Now, are symbols being used for this or this? Much like those beasts coming out of the sea. Will they be literal beasts coming out of the sea? Those are things to only you can answer for your own thoughts, But I do think that he's talking about different numbers. He starts talking about different heavenly scenes and monsters and angels and thrones, and he uses a lot of Old Testament imagery in here as well. So we're going to try to eat this. And another thing that he says, Satan's bound for 1,000 years, and that's going to be one of the most important terms as we go into next week. Is those 1,000 years? When does that happen? How does that happen? Does that word mean not 999, not 1,001? Does it mean 1,000? That's something that you'll have to just kind of wrestle with yourself. But we're going to read Revelation 20, verses 1 through 15, and then our last verses are in 21, 1 through 8. Revelation 21, verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it, and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that, he must be released for a little while. And even that one right there, that ties back into Matthew 13, where he kind of talked about that. I shouldn't have stopped reading, but anyway, just to highlight that one part there. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those whom the authority to judge was committed. Also, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, or had not received its mark on their foreheads or on their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power. For they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison, and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth, and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. In chapter 21, verses 1 through 8, it says, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I'm making all things new. And he said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his king, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So, there's several major scenes that we just went through, especially as we went from chapter to chapter there. But we see, again, that Satan's bound. We see that Christ's people are reigning. There's this 1,000-year period that's described, especially in that first paragraph there over and over. Satan is then released. There's this final rebellion. God defeats his enemies. And then there's this white throne. And the dead stand before God. The books are open. there's this courtroom imagery again, where here we are, we have this throne, we have these people who are being judged. So that's about the fourth time at least that we got to that. But Revelation is just echoing Daniel. I feel like, when you have that courtroom, you have these books being opened. The final judgment, when John describes it here, he lays out that there's these books, and there's this book of life, there's this, and again, we're talking about, is this symbolic, is this literal, does this mean that all knowledge is taken into, he has full knowledge to be able to then make his judgment? Or does he sit down and he opens up this book, which is this ledger, and it has this log of names in it? There's a lot of questions to be asked there. And then death. And then there's the devil himself being thrown into this fire of, this pit. Are these things symbolic? Are these things literal? There's a lot of major views. I'm going to skip over a lot. I just want to kind of talk about the connectedness of the new heaven and the new earth, which I think is at least 5 out of these 6 passages. And when we got to Isaiah 65, and he talks about that all death's gone, mourning and crying, and all these things are gone. Pain, there's no arguments, there's none of these things. But it's God dwelling with his redeemed creation, which is, I think, exactly what we see here. And so, there's a lot to be said for these different things. I wanted to have some good discussion time at the end, but I've got 1 minute. So I do appreciate you sitting through this out. I feel like there's such a value sometimes to just slowing down and reading the Bible, or having it read to you is such a good thing. And so hopefully that'll help us, give us a little bit of a base as we move forward and we start discussing what these mean in these different systems, because we already kind of have our own thoughts on it a little bit. It says this, it says that. Hopefully that'll gain our confidence a little bit on that. We'll have a quick prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Lord, we just thank you so much for bringing us here this morning, challenging and changing us as we open your word and we read it at length. We ask that as we interpret it, you allow the Holy Spirit to take over and to lead us into truth. We ask that you bless our worship time this morning as we go worship corporately, and you continue to bless our lives. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. All right. I told him.